Let's move to item 4.4, our state and federal update. Vice Chancellor Garcia.
Okay. Good afternoon, board members, President, Chancellor. I'm going to give you the state legislative update and the federal update, and you should have a copy of both reports. And if you don't have the federal report, I have a stack sitting right here. We can distribute it. If you don't have the federal, no, we better. Okay, so I won't go into a lot of detail because you have the reports that provide a lot of the specific information on various bills and proposals, but I will highlight some of the major issues that I think are important for you to know. So starting with the state legislative process, we are now currently in the summer recess. Last Friday was the deadline for policy committees to take action on bills in the second house. So we're nearing the final stretch in the legislative process. The legislature will come back August 6th, and then they have 1 month for the final month of session. They will adjourn the 2-year session, sine die, on August 31st. So the first 2 weeks in August will be focused on appropriations committees, and there's a lot of activity and a lot of focus will be placed on the work of the appropriations committees. We have a number of important bills that will be heard that first week back when the legislature reconvenes in August. The last 2 weeks are going to be devoted to floor session, no committees unless there's a rule waiver and you have a special committee off the floor. So by and large, the activity will be appropriations and then the floor and then off to the governor. So let me highlight some of the key issues and key actions that have been taken in this last round of policy committees, which is taking up from where we left off your last meeting. The student success issues, the 2 bills that are Board of Governors sponsored bills, SB 1456, which the Chancellor referenced earlier today, and SB 1062 are the 2 bills that were part of the task force set of recommendations. They are moving through the process. Let me start with SB 1456. This bill is going to be heard in the Assembly Appropriations Committee on August 8th. It just got out of the Assembly Higher Education Committee with full support. And I think that it's really important to mention in the case of this bill that there was a lot of work that went into fleshing out details and looking at amendments from the time that this bill cleared the Senate and then when it was heard at the next policy committee in the Assembly. In particular, we worked very closely with faculty. I think the faculty put tremendous work into analyzing the various provisions, particularly the Academic Senate and a variety of faculty labor groups that were really vigilant and thorough in their analysis of the bill. And I think we have a much stronger bill as a result of these amendments and compromises, actually. And we still have a very strong bill that is serving the system well in terms of highlighting the direction that the community colleges has set forth in terms of dealing with these challenging times with minimal resources, but yet not strain from its commitment to help more students complete. And that message is very strong and I think resonates well with the legislature. In addition, this legislation has caught the attention of numerous press accounts, various reports that have been recently issued that reference the important work being done by the California community colleges. So I think that the hard work that's gone in strengthening this bill through the consultation process, working with students, working with faculty, that, not everyone is completely pleased with every provision in the bill, but I think most people will acknowledge that the bill is a lot stronger and they're a lot more comfortable with it, even if they haven't taken a formal position in support of the bill. So I think that speaks to the commitment of the system to work hard at this. The second bill, SB 1062, is by Senator Carol Liu, and this bill has already cleared both houses with no votes, or actually I take that back, with 2 no votes, and it's now on its way to the governor's desk. It still is in enrollment, and it should be getting to the governor's desk shortly. So we're urging the numerous colleges around the state that have supported this measure, which is to give the chancellor some additional authority to hire senior level executive management team staff through the CEA, which is a civil service process, and to broaden it slightly just so we'd be able to bring more community college expertise in through that particular approach. So we'll have a report on what the outcome of is on that bill probably next time we meet. We may not have a report on the outcome of all of the other bills at your next meeting because they may still very well be on the governor's desk. The second set of Board of Governors bills that you have sponsored deal with career technical education and economic reauthorizing our economic and workforce development program. SB 1402 by Senator Liu reauthorizes the Community College Economic Development and Workforce Program, and SB 1070 by Senator Darrell Steinberg reauthorizes the Career Technical Pathways Program. Both bills have cleared the first house and have gotten out of several policy committees actually, and are both waiting to be heard by the Assembly Appropriations Committee when we return in August. And they are both overwhelmingly supported by both sides of the aisle, and just are enjoying strong support. I think what's important to note about your Board of Governors legislation this year is that it really has highlighted the kind of work, the innovative and unique work that the community colleges do for the state of California. And I think you're hearing more and more people talk about the critical and vital service that community colleges play for the state of California. And that's really important for us to be aggressive in ensuring that people understand that about our system and how critical it is to fund us in the future. So your board-sponsored legislation is doing very well. I think it's accomplishing some significant policy changes, but also it's really reaffirming the role community colleges play in the state. A couple of other areas that I think are important to note in terms of where there has been real strong focus, legislative focus on issues. And one has to do with textbook issues. There have been a flurry of bills that have been introduced trying to reduce the cost of textbooks, trying to add more technology and establish easier ways to provide e-textbooks. Many of those bills have not continue to move forward, but I think what they've done is they've prompted a discussion about the role of textbooks and are we as innovative as we can be in higher education. A couple of bills that are moving are 2 bills by Senator Darrell Steinberg, and these are SB 1052 and SB 1053. And these are the companion bills that would establish a California digital open source library. That would be one bill. And the second bill would be establishing a California Educational Resources Council. The concept behind this is to really bring the 3 academic senates from the 3 segments together, public segments, to really come up with a way to figure out how to provide free or low-cost textbooks, digital textbooks for the 50 most common or popular textbooks. I think our academic senates from all 3 segments have really looked into these pieces of legislation and provided valuable input about there are different ways to determine which books should be digitized as a first priority, not necessarily most popular, but perhaps most costly and most widely used. So there are those kinds of things that still need to be addressed in the legislation. And I think that the faculty will continue their work in giving input. And I know that Chancellor Barry Russell has given lots of input. And these 2 bills are still evolving, but they're moving. So it's important for us to focus on them. The second set of issues is veterans issues, and this board has been particularly interested in doing what we can to help veteran students, and of course in the next several years community colleges are most likely to be the educational institution that the majority of veterans come to. And there were 7 bills introduced this year addressing a variety of issues, mostly in the area of giving them enrollment priority, more enrollment priority, giving them in-state tuition if they're from out of state and they express an intent to stay in the state of California. That's been one set of bills that have been introduced. And then the second set is an issue that we've talked a lot about, and that is, these are bills, and there are 3 of them, and 2 of them by Assembly Member Marty Block. There are 2 bills, AB 2534 and AB 2462. And then there's a third bill that is by Assembly Member Gural, ACR, I have them summarized in the back of it, ACR 159. These 3 bills deal with this topic of when you have military service under your belt and you come back to California and want to go into post-secondary education, should you not have some credit for the kind of education and training you've received while in the military service? I think everyone agrees that that's a valuable and important thing to do. Of course, the question is, how do you do this? The devil's in the detail. So I think these 3 different bills are attempting to find different ways to get at that issue. One would establish a pilot project that would require the Chancellor's Office to, in fact, design a way to give credit using these ACE guidelines that are national guidelines set forth for colleges around the country to give credit for service. Another one would be for the Chancellor's Office to come up with a common numbering system based, again, on these ACE guidelines, which is challenging. And then the third one would just basically encourage the colleges to do this, that this is something that's important. So I think what you're seeing, and I know the faculty have been really looking at these bills carefully, is that there's a strong interest to do this. So anything we can do to make progress in this area would probably be greatly appreciated by this constituency and obviously by legislators who are very interested in this area. One other bill I want to mention to you is a pension bill that has been approved overwhelmingly by the legislature and has now been sent to the governor. And this is a AB 178 by Assembly Member Gural. I think this whole pension reform issue, as you've been reading in the newspapers, has been a huge issue. We have one particular small piece of it that the districts and the Chancellor's Office have been looking at carefully with regard to how we are able to appoint special trustees in a timely fashion, particularly when our colleges are facing academic or fiscal distress. This bill does help the Chancellor's Office in being able to appoint a special trustee in a couple of ways. It does provide an exemption for the Chancellor's Office when needing to appoint a special trustee when the Chancellor's Office is able to meet certain conditions, primarily advertising for this position and doing a couple of other things. What this does that's different than what we've had in the past is that this delays the process in being able to appoint a special trustee. This bill is not necessarily very helpful to local districts that want to appoint an interim, because it doesn't give them the exemption, and so they would be subject to what is an increased cap that you can compensate an interim chancellor, and it goes from 31 to 40,000, but they would be limited to that cap. So it is a significant bill, but it's right now the politics of addressing pension reform and really limiting and restricting any potential for double dipping has really, I think, kind of set the stage for being very conservative on these issues. And so AB 178 is, we don't know where the governor will stand on that, but it is something that we're watching carefully, and it is helpful to us. Not as helpful as we would have hoped, but given the broader politics of pension reform, it helps us deal with a sunset date that no longer allows any exemptions as of June 30th of this year. So this will give us some time until the conference committee, there's a pension reform conference committee meeting, and they're expected to have their proposal before the end of session, which will deal with a whole gamut of pension issues. That would not go into effect until January 1st, 2013. This bill is an urgency, it would go into effect immediately. So that's the significance of that bill. I think that's a high-level summary of state legislation that I think you would be most interested in. I'm happy to answer any questions, or I can move on to federal.
Member Baum.
Is there any indication or concern about the governor signing the Lieu bill? Because then will the governor worry about losing the ability of the executive to make these appointments?
That's probably where our greatest challenge lies, because of course we are asking for an exception. And we've been pretty straightforward in saying that we know we're asking for special consideration, a special accommodation, but we're talking about 9 positions that are part of the executive management team that increasingly are called upon to look at new and innovative ways in which we can, from a statewide perspective, help and support the colleges do their work. We are being pretty upfront about that. We understand what we're asking, and it is an exception, and we're urging the governor to consider that important enough that he's willing to make the exception.
So anybody who has an ability to approach the governor or make that statement, we should do that.
We would really appreciate that.
In-house without, what has been the nature of that discussion about how you fill a need in the administrative leadership area?
Given the
limitations that this place
expiration
is.
of the current exemption, I think that's probably a good question to ask. You know, I think that's the type of issue that our local colleges, and maybe even Scott Lay, if he's still here, probably has more insight onto that question, finding ways to find the appropriate leadership in a timely fashion to keep colleges on course when in fact there is a vacancy. But I think those are the kinds of discussions that are being reviewed right now in terms of what would make it attractive to bring this expertise in for a short period of time, but the need for some significant expertise to help colleges through these rocky times.
Challenges, the formal approval process under AB 178 of coming to the Board of Governors and asking for the approval of an appointment, you know, that's going to take several months, depending on when your meeting is. And so that is a significant concern. We hope we can reopen that when the overall pension discussion when the legislature comes back in August.
Chancellor Scott.
Well, I think Scott answered it. It doesn't impact if, for instance, you need an interim, let's use the president. You need an interim president. If you were to take a vice president within your organization and make that person your interim president, that's not affected. What's affected is if you take an STRS retiree and make that person, and this substantially cuts back on our flexibility in doing that. Because you know, because of the, I think it's an overstated concern, but what we would call double dipping. And right now there's such a reluctance to have anything that looks at all like double dipping in this time of pension reform has led to this. Well, what actually happened, of course, as you know, the sunset expired. And so now we're back to $30,000 a year. Now you could hire an STRS retiree, but only if that person in turn would reinstate himself or herself and go and lose their pension for that period of time. So this is a real handicap for community colleges and for, of course, for K through 12 as well.
Now, I understand the dilemma. I just was wondering how much discussion is being had with regard to impact. How effective can we actually be in a practical sense of filling that leadership gap, the need?
Well, obviously fulfilling it with the STRS retiree has been greatly limited as a result of this.
You want to move on to federal,
Okay.
Vice Chancellor?
Okay, so Congress is now back in session until their August summer recess. There've been a couple of significant actions taken in Congress. One is right before the July 1st sunset date on student loan interest rates, they were scheduled to double if in fact the Congress didn't take action to retain the current interest rate at 3.4. They eventually reached a compromise, and you had a bipartisan supported action to keep the student subsidized interest rates at 3.4. And the offset to fund that came primarily from the federal pension system, and of course that's where the dispute was in being able to find a compromise in taking that action. But for students who have loans, they're still going to be able to enjoy the 3.4 interest rate for one more year. A second issue that's really significant is that the U.S. District Court struck down portions of the gainful employment reporting requirements that were issued last year by the U.S. Department of Education. And this was targeted at institutions that provide occupational education, primarily the private for-profits, and it also encompassed community colleges. These disclosure requirements were very challenging for us to meet, to develop the capacity to collect this information. It's something that we've been working on for the past year. So what was struck down was this, there were three areas of reporting or disclosure and these gainful employment regulations. And one of them involved if you had loan default rates of more than 35%, you'd have to be subject to various disclosures. Well, the court ruled that that 35% rate was arbitrary. So since a lot of their federal regulations hinged on that rate, they're having to go back and revise their regulations and issue some new guidance, and that's what the U.S. Department of Ed is working on. So it is significant. It gives us some breathing room to think through these issues. I think, though, that overall, there's still a strong interest in understanding to the completion rates for community colleges, and if in fact people are getting the kinds of jobs they set out to get. Very hard to measure that, but clearly there's an interest in understanding whether students are going into the occupations they train for. So I'm sure we'll continue hearing more about that. And then lastly, just I want to update where we are in terms of the federal budget process. So both houses are dealing with their appropriations bills. The Senate has already, their subcommittee has already approved the appropriations measure that affects higher education. And not surprisingly, the Senate, being dominated by majority Democrats, has a very substantial and generous support for Pell Grants and the kinds of issues that we care about, including allowing students with, they call them ATB students, ability to benefit students, mainly students who don't have a high school degree or students who have a GED. If they're pursuing a vocational ed program or career technical ed program, they're eligible for Pell Grants. That's really significant. It's not all the students, but that's a very significant provision in the Senate proposal. The House, on the other hand, has not voted yet on their proposal, but just to put in context how far apart the House and the Senate are with respect to their funding interests with education, the Senate bill that was just, or the Senate committee measure that was just approved added about $700 million from last year's budget. The House measure that's being considered, and they have, the way they do it there is that they establish a funding cap that they try to achieve in their proposal or in their measure. The House measure is going to cut education funding by $7 billion. So increase of $700 million in the Senate version, decrease of $7 billion in the House version. So clearly there are going to be some real divergent approaches to how to fund education. And both of these measures are likely to just be parked on their respective House floors until after the election. So we really won't expect anything to happen with regard to the budget. Last thing, of course, it's political.
Chancellor, let me just ask real quick. In the House, where does this $7 billion in cuts come from? I mean, imagine it's a whole bunch of things, but if you had to name a couple, what are the major
I think they're
sources?
looking at streamlining a lot of the workforce preparation programs and cutting out grant programs and reducing Pell Grants, and probably looking at things like not giving Pell Grants to part-time students, which of course would be extremely onerous for us. But that's, you know, those are the kinds of proposals that they're probably considering. What ultimately gets negotiated, we would hope would be someplace more in the middle,
Yeah.
but,
Okay.
yeah, some pretty draconian, very deep and painful cuts.
Okay.
And then lastly, it is a political election year, and just to give you a sense of how significant and how, you know, that election years are on the minds of the members we work with day in and day out. For example, in the state legislature, of the 120 members, 67 of them are seeking either re-election or election to another position. It's you know, a significant number of elections that are taking place, so of course, you know, that injects a certain amount of politics in the last month of session, and then of course at the federal level we have the same thing. So it's one of those years that we need to stay focused and watch every step in the process, not take anything for granted, and it's something that will keep us very busy in August. So with that, I think my report is concluded, and I'm happy to answer any further questions.
Members, thank you for a great report as usual, Vice Chancellor, and I really appreciate all your hard work and the Chancellor's hard work on our sponsored bills. I think they've been expertly handled, and you deserve our thanks.